Greg Mackey and Peter Watts have joined forces once again to create MW Pro Audio. That's Mackey and Watts Pro Audio, and they've got a couple of mixing boards that I believe they're going to be debuting at an upcoming InfoComm show in Vegas. Now, if you're not familiar with these two gentlemen, they have been involved in the development of more pro audio consoles than most people watching this video have ever stood behind. So there's a lot of history here and a lot of experience going into these console designs. And after having a quick look at these and knowing that Peter Watts was involved with the QSE TouchMix series of mixers, if QSE isn't on the phone to these guys trying to license this design to bring it under their banner, I don't know what they are doing, because this should be the evolution of the TouchMix series. That line needs an update, and these gentlemen, I think, also agree, because they have produced some mixers that look like the obvious evolution of a TouchMix, to me anyway. So I don't know the politics there, but let's have a look and you can decide for yourself. So starting with the D24 screenshots here and the overall layout of the mixer, you can kind of see like the styling is very similar to what we're used to in that TouchMix series. Even the font choices feel very familiar. And here's a look at the channel overview, and they're calling these, what are they calling these again? The big channel, the great channel? They're calling something, yeah, they're calling those big channels.
The big stuff!
So they've got signal processing through ingenious big channels. And it pretty much just looks like a typical layout of a channel overview screen from almost any modern mixing console, honestly. They're leaning into kind of this analog styling a little more than you might expect. They've got, these virtual VU meters going on. They've got some stuff happening here with chicken head knobs. And, for me, that software styling, I'm not a huge fan. I don't really care as long as it's functional, but I'd personally just care more that the metering is just accurate, and maybe that I'd be able to change the ballistics of the meters to set them up for whatever I'm doing. And if that's possible, I don't really care if it's represented as a needle style VU meter or an LED style, like a bar meter, as long as it's accurate and I can set it up the way I want to. The styling, personally, the simpler the better for me. I don't really go in for the analog needle stuff and the tube saturation here. I don't know if I would ever use something like that as an insert on a live mixer. If that's something that you would find interesting enough to have on every single channel, I'd be interested to know that, but it's not something that I'd be super pressed about, honestly. And looking at the 24 channel model, it looks like it's laid out very nicely, very logically. There are 24 actual microphone preamps here on combo jack, so you can get 1/4 inch or XLR inputs into all of those. There's a TRS line input for channels 23 and 24 as well, and then a single headphone output and a talkback button. You'll see on this mixer that there are a number of features that you would expect more to see on like a recording console, talkback, and then there's transport controls built in right here with the record. But I think more and more folks are using their mixer as an all-in-one interface recorder and live mixer nowadays. So I definitely appreciate that they're including all these different controls, because they are logical controls that you're going to need in any scenario. On the right-hand side here, you've got home, a menu button, you've got phantom power, you've got a D-feedback hardware button. So they've got some anti-feedback features built in here, and they've put a hardware button right on the surface there so you can access that quickly in a live setting. They've got assignment, effects mute hardware button, a mute group hardware button, and a scene hardware button. And then down here we've got this nice big scroll wheel, and then some other controls here that I'm not entirely sure what all they do. I'm assuming there's going to be different functionality depending on what screen you're actually using. And it'll be interesting to see when we get hands-on with this mixer whether or not that's a workflow that is quick and intuitive, or if it's some clunky thing where you're dealing with a scroll wheel more often than you want to be. Down here at the bottom, it looks like we have some monitor controls, record, and then multi-track access. A lot of these style mixers really depend on how the software is actually implemented and how it feels. If it's very responsive and quick and consistent, that's a really big deal with these smaller mixers as to whether or not they become popular. Honestly, if people feel like they can use them and, work on them quickly and get the results they want, they tend to be successful mixers. And the ones that feel laggy and feel like you're fooling with software tend not to be that successful. That's just what I've observed over the years, having looked at many of these, touch screen based mixers and lunchbox style mixers that rely on iPads and apps to be controlled. It really comes down to how they actually implement the software, on a user interface level. Is it fast enough to feel like it's really working with you, as opposed to, you having to fight it to get what you want? And you can put all sorts of stuff on paper about what you're going to have a mixer do, but it really does come down to the implementation on the software side. Now, looking at the D32 model, this has a really unique feature, and I can't help but think that this feels a lot like Mackey's old Rotopod design, where the entire input-output section was on a ribbon cable, and you could physically rotate it depending on if you wanted the I/O to be on the top or the back of the mixer, right? Like, if you're old enough to remember that, maybe this feels kind of similar. And honestly, I think this is awesome. I think the butterfly latches are a little bit hilarious, but I think the idea of having a detachable stage box that can either clip right onto the mixer and give you those 32 inputs and all your other I/O locally, or you can just unclip it and put it out as a stage box, that's really cool. I think that's innovative. I think that's unique, and I think that's a really, really cool design. I'm into that. I don't know what you think. Let me know, but they're saying that they can split apart and let you put the I/O up to 150 feet away from the controller with just a Cat6 cable connecting them. And it's also rack mountable. And you also get a floor pedal that lets you switch between 4 scenes, effects, presets, or mute groups for free. I think there's a picture of that. Yeah, they're throwing in a floor pedal with this mixer. So honestly, I'm here for it. This is pretty cool stuff. I don't know what you think, but I'd love to hear your opinions. But just looking at what they've come up with, I think we need this kind of innovation and this kind of, unusual, interesting design and something unique in this world of mixers. I think this is right on time. I think this is a design that might actually be pretty popular. It looks like on the 32 channel model, we get some slightly different stuff on the surface. We get some additional USB. We get an XLR input for the talk pack, a dedicated local input there, which is pretty nice. And just a quick rundown through the basic features here. There's 32 of their Lyric preamps. Those are designed by Peter Watts, and he obviously has history designing a lot of consoles, including the Trident consoles they've pointed out here that Fleetwood Mac used back in the 70s. And we've got a detachable stage box. You can create customized home screens with only the faders you're using. The signal processing on those big channels all have compression, limiting, gates, parametric EQ, and effects. There's 31 band graphic equalizers available with an RTA function. It looks like there are 4 subgroups, 4 mute groups, 8 fader groups, 4 DCAs with intuitive implementation. Be interesting to see what that means when we get to look at the actual software working. There are 6 effects buses, 2 stereo and 4 mono aux sends. Easy pop-up access to low-cut filter and channel delay. That's really important if you're doing any sort of corporate work or work that needs to be synced to video sources. Having individual channel delay is incredibly important, and it's great to see that on a small mixer that may inevitably end up in some sort of corporate breakout room. 12 function foot pedal is included. We talked about that a moment ago. There's a built-in subwoofer crossover with selectable slope and roll-off. So that's very handy if you're deploying a small system to have that all built in. 3 alternate mixes feature. We're going to have a look at that later. A matrix mixer built in. There's also a simple mode. So if you've got volunteers or beginners, or if you need to put this mixer out and let a client have basic volume control, that could be a very handy feature. There is the anti-feedback that we talked about. We're definitely going to want to dig into that more. There are 2 USB-A I/O sockets. Now, if that allows you to plug in devices like a computer or a phone or something directly with a USB cable to use them as a source, that could be huge. I'm definitely going to want to see more about that in the future. Record and playback, it looks like you can do 2-track, 32-track, or DAW recording via a USB-C connection. So I'm sure folks will be excited to see that you can multi-track and that there's USB-C built in there. Remote tablet mixing, I think we assumed that via Wi-Fi, no app needed. So I guess they're going to be doing a web-based mixer, kind of like the Soundcraft UI series mixers that we looked at before on the channel. And honestly, the web-based mixer that used, I love that. I think that's a great idea. I love not having to keep another app updated on my devices, and being able to just use any web browser is actually really handy, in my opinion anyway. They've got a full illustrated manual available on screen. That could be very useful for beginners or people learning, kind of reduce the learning curve there. You can set user permissions to restrict people from walking up and messing with it. It's got a solid steel chassis and new wear-proof proprietary glass surface that is impervious to dust and liquids. So they're obviously aware that touchscreens can be a challenge in real live settings, and they're trying to combat that by using some quality materials, hopefully, that actually do resist dust and liquids, because that'd be really nice. It's tough to deal with tablets and touch screens, especially outdoors a lot of times. We don't always, as sound contractors, get to choose where we deploy our equipment. And, that simple wedding ceremony outside of the venue, that could be next to a beach or on a golf course, or you don't know what sort of dust or sand or what have you is going to be blowing across your equipment. And you've just got to know that you can get the job done and move on to the next job that you hopefully have booked the next day, and trust that your gear is going to keep working. And finally, to wrap up, they've got some notes here on what this mixer can do that other mixers can't. So let's see how much water that holds.
Does the defense's case hold water?
They say they've got the integrated stage box, nothing more to buy. And genuinely, I have not seen another small mixer where you can take the I/O off like that and use it as a stage box. So I'll give them that one. Greg Mackey's intuitive interface makes navigation easy with over 100 screens. And we can't really judge that until we get to use it in the real world and see if it actually feels intuitive. But I think if anybody's got a chance to make a successful go at that, Greg Mackey is the guy. They've got color-coded faders, so not just like a channel ID that gets color-coded. The actual fader itself looks like it changes colors or gets a little color tag on top that is unique. They've got a main left-right fader visible on all screens. Is that unique to that? I feel like the Touch Mix does that, no? You can see linked channels, DCAs, and subgroups directly on the channel faders. Overview screen shows every fader in the D32 system. They've got a pop-up for gain, low-cut, polarity, and anti-clip. A pop-up for fader group, fader color, channel link, right strip, and more. A pop-up for phones, speakers, and delay. And it is impervious to dust and liquid. So I think we're going to have to take their word on a lot of that until we actually get to use the mixer and see how all that stuff works and how they've managed to get the software to work. And it'll be, of course, interesting to see what it sounds like. So let me know what you think of these mixers down below. Do you think they look like the Touch Mix? And what do you make of this I/O that comes off and turns into a stage box? I'm excited to see these in person. I don't think I'll make it out to InfoComm this year. I honestly don't know when it is, but I don't have any plans to be there. But maybe I'll be able to talk somebody into letting us have a look at one of these on the channel for a video. If this thing does everything they say it does, though, I would seriously recommend the QSC get their checkbook out.
Pay that man his money.
Thanks for watching. I'll see you here next time.